I think anybody can be an ally. I think you have to have certain attributes, which is about being open, which is about exhibiting empathy, which is about encouraging others, and also being prepared to challenge either policies or processes or behaviour that is contrary to having a diverse and inclusive environment. I'm an active ally for disabled employees at Network Rail. And what this means is that I make sure that what we do supports both their access to training opportunities, access to different services, make sure that our policies are correct, and on occasion represent their views if they are not available. I think that the organisation has changed in a number of ways through having allies like myself. It considers disability much more proactively. Our capacity to meet the needs of disabled employees and disabled passengers is increasing. We are mindful of and sensitised to the experience of disabled people, and we use that to inform our approach to our passengers as well as to our employees and to our potential employees. In my experience as an ally, I think what works is being or having a sense of humility. So an ally isn't expected to be the font of all knowledge. You are expected really to be open to and supportive of the needs of the individual that you're supporting. I think allies ought to be courageous. So there's no point in being an ally and kind of being invisible. I think if you're an ally, people ought to recognise you as such, and that means that you sometimes have to ask some challenging questions of others. You might well have to make representations on behalf of somebody, and so therefore you need an element of boldness and bravery.
Good afternoon. I'm Lorraine Martins. I'm actually live now. So watching yourself buffering is a very interesting experience. I'd like to really welcome you to this People Change session. And I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Network Rail. And I've been a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Group at the Royal Academy of Engineering for some time now. So it's really my pleasure to be chairing this panel discussion. So welcome to the People of Change session as part of the Diversity and Inclusion conference that we're having at the Academy today, focusing on engineering change. So today we've been looking at change through the lens of leadership, through systems change, and our own personal responsibility. And we really do want to increase the pace of change and build on the increased awareness of inequalities, particularly in the light of the Black Lives Matter movement and the health inequalities that have become so apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic. So becoming an ally is something that we can all do to bring about change much sooner. And as you've just seen in the film, we at the Royal Academy have created an allyship in the area of disability. And we're going to explore some of the themes highlighted in the film over the next hour. And I was the chair of the Academy Action Group for the Majority Allies Toolkit, the film that you just saw. And there are 6 different films that share examples of being ally, and believe me, I didn't choose that one to show you. So just as a reminder, if you're new to the conference, there are captions that are enabled at the bottom. If you don't want them off, if you don't want them on, you can turn them off. But I think the most important thing really now is to get on with the discussion with our esteemed panel, who are going to share their own insights and strategies and their experiences really of leading allyship across engineering networks. So we'll do that for about 20 minutes, and then we'll go on to the breakouts where you can have more in-depth conversations about being an ally. So today we are joined by Siobhan Endon, the National Officer for Equalities at the Unite the Union, Dr. Ollie Folayan, who is the co-founder of the Association for Black and Ethnic Minority Engineers in the UK, Alex Knight, who's a fellow and trustee of the Women's Engineering Society, and Dr. Mark McBride Wright, who's the co-founder of Into Engineering. So welcome you as panels, really looking forward to our discussions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a series of questions and we're going to have a discussion and then we'll move on into a breakout room. But what I'd like to do is the first question I'd like to put to you, Alex. So why is allyship or acts of solidarity part of your organization's diversity and inclusion strategy? And what does that look like?
Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, so I'm a trustee of the Women's Engineering Society, so here representing WES. And you may know that WES has been around for over 100 years. And so our strategy over that time has always been focused on supporting women in engineering and promoting inclusion in the engineering industry. And as a part of this, allyship and acts of solidarity are very, very important. But I think it's something that's sort of become more prominent over more recent years. In that if you go back in the history of WES, it was very much set up by women, run by women, for women. And now we're getting to the stage where actually, you know, we have male members. So we have men as allies who are members of the Women's Engineering Society. They are associate members. They can also be associate fellows. So you can be a fellow of WES as a man. And we actually have our first male board member as well now. So I think we see allyship and acts of solidarity very much as an important part of our strategy moving forward to really accelerate progress with gender diversity, particularly in engineering. And we very much promote and celebrate men as allies. So we do a number of things with, as men as our members, they can absolutely get involved in all of the all of the stuff we do in WES, be that the meetings that we hold, the cluster events that are organised. So being part of the conversation. And I think that's important because we want to have these conversations about what is inclusion more frequently and what is a majority ally. We need to get that much more into normal conversation. And so it's important that men are part of that within WES. We also have an award where we celebrate men as allies, because I think it's really important to showcase role models in this area and to be able to highlight best practice. So what do we mean by being an ally? What does that actually mean? And for WES, that means supporting, championing women in engineering. And, you know, the kind of examples we've seen around that, just to try and make this tangible, is anything from men setting up mentoring programs in their organization for women to support women and help women progress in their career, help sponsor them. We've seen men set up podcasts in their own time, voluntarily running podcasts to raise the profile of women engineers and engineering more generally. We've seen men putting a huge amount of time volunteering into organizations that support and promote females in engineering. I mean, the winner we had last year, we had fantastic people going forward for this award last year. The winner was Mark Wild from Crossrail, the CEO of Crossrail. And what he'd done in his organization in just 18 months is grow the percentage of women in his leadership team from something like 16% to nearly 60%. And just shows what can be done when you set that as a priority. So that's the kind of thing we're celebrating and raising the profile of for men as allies as part of WES. And I think we will continue to do more of that in WES as part of our strategy, because it is so important that we're all in this together. And just like you said, I saw you speak at an event a while back, Lorraine, and you said, we are all a majority ally to someone. And I've always held that true to myself since you said that. I think that is so true. And it just is so important in all of our strategies to do with inclusion.
Thank you, Alex. And those tangible examples are really useful. I think that people will be able to take away and emulate themselves. Ollie, would you like to sort of follow up on any of things in terms of your experience of why allyship is so important to your strategy and what it looks like for AFBE?
Yeah, so I really like a lot of the examples that Alex has given there. Of it occurred to us quite early in AFBE that no change ever happens without people who champion it, but champions only get so far without allies. And so it's always been our goal as an organization to ensure that our membership is diverse, because unless we have that community that understand the issues, we are unable to achieve a change. But as an organization, we also recognize that our role to be majority allies, as you said, within our organization's objectives is the empowerment and support of women. So although we are an ethnicity focused group, we also consider ourselves to be gender allies. It's the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are. So
thank you, Ollie. I really appreciate that. Can I take my second question to you, Siobhan, please? So we're in a current time of economic turmoil, and we know that that's had a disproportionate effect, particularly on people from Black and ethnic minority communities, disabled people, people with caring responsibilities. So what does allyship look like in a period of recession?
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you for inviting me. And I think, the first thing I'd like to say is that I think that Ollie's point around ensuring that you've got the authentic voice of people is so critically important when you are dealing with issues of allyship. And I suppose for Unite the Union, we'd consider ourselves alongside the Women's Engineering Society as the original allies, I think, in providing a voice for all people on the shop floor and throughout organisations. And within Unite, what we have is our equality structures that gives a voice to members. Within our union, we're able to bring together those members who work in different sectors and learn from each other. So Lorraine, I'm aware of the amazing work you do at Network Rail on diversity and inclusion, and our trade union has long supported that and worked with you over that. But we spend a lot of time talking with our members about how important that work is and how much change you can make. Particularly in male-dominated industries, by learning from each other. And so, in particular, some of the work that we have done within engineering has been around trying to ensure that more women, and young women in particular, but adult women as well, who may be considering a career change, are able to access apprenticeships. And what we've learned by talking to our male members who work in engineering, if you learn from our young women members, is that the person who has most influence over what apprenticeship you take is probably your dad or your mum. And if your dad works in engineering and your dad is saying, oh, you don't want to work there, please don't choose that, then that will have a major impact. So we understood that we had a big role to play in talking to our members who work in engineering about, if you don't want your daughter to work in engineering, then why? And what is it that you need to do to make the change that's necessary? And it comes back to your opening video, Lorraine, about the changes that are necessary to make, and about an organisational culture that will hear people. And I think, particularly in times of recession, which was my question, it's very much about also empowering people to make that change. And one of the, we will take, industrial action and massive defence of our members if they feel that their jobs are at threat. And most recently in Barnoldswick in Rolls-Royce, we've been able to secure 350 engineering jobs and worked with the company to make sure that there's a bright future for a training centre there, which is really critically important. But also it's about making sure that all of the workers in that sites are valued. And I'm mindful of the Mighty workers who, they work for Mighty, but they worked at Sellafield. And last year we took industrial action to make sure that they got a pay rise, because actually on their own, they weren't heard and they didn't have a voice at work, and nobody realised how badly and how poorly they were paid. And so allyship for us has to lead to change, and it has to lead to more secure jobs, better training, and better paying conditions for people at work. And sometimes that makes us unpopular with bosses. We know that. But actually, if you're the authentic voice of workers, then we have a responsibility to stand up and say, And what's not often recognised is the huge amount of work that we do celebrating equality and making changes in workplaces, particularly in engineering workplaces, to make them better for all people to work in. And next week, an International Women's Day, very similar to the discussion you've had around Crossrail and celebrating that ally, we'll be celebrating the work of London Gateway. And there's going to be a shift in London Gateway that's staffed entirely by women members of Unite and women workers, and that's because of the work that's gone on in partnership between the trade union and managers to say that actually they did want a more diverse workforce. So
thank you, Siobhan. Not mindful that I'm trying to make sure everybody gets a contribution, but you're absolutely right in terms of trade unions' positions as allies are about, as I said in the film, being bold and being brave and really supporting the authentic voice. I wondered, Mark, if you wanted to add anything to what Siobhan has said.
Sure. So representing Inter-Engineering, we connect, inform and empower LGBT plus engineers and supporters. So sexual orientation and gender identity sits within the hidden elm of diversity, which can be the sort of secondary to come into focus with regard to the visible identities. And it can also be the most awkward one to address because of the confusion around sex life and, just the gender of your partner. And what we tend to see is that there's actually quite a big chasm when it comes to getting the majority to become allies, because the starting point of their understanding is they perceive D&I as a threat, potentially. They've maybe not yet bought into the business case. And so especially to answer the question directly in terms of a recession, with scarce resources and fewer people and greater scrutiny on the economics and performance, people are operating in a stressed state. So it's easier to cut corners and be overly focused on the outputs and to forget about the micro moments which allow for connection, which make culture. So allyship is all about looking out for your colleagues, peers, and customers, and especially those that might be less privileged than you. There's a really good continuum to look up called the Allyship Continuum that looks at the learning journey from apathy, awareness, active, and advocacy. And I always say that when you are a real, genuine ally, because being an ally is a verb, it's not a noun, it's not a label that you wear with a rainbow lanyard because you've signed to take a pledge. It means that you truly and authentically have taken the effort to understand the lived experience of what it means to be the only Black engineer on site or the engineer who's in the closet. And then you can represent them on a panel or talk about their experiences authentically. And then anything you've got control over in terms of processes and procedures, you can help influence. So that's in the context of organization, and you should apply that to your ERGs as well, employee resource groups, around the microcultures, creating porosity where people can come in, be present, be an ally, learn and understand, but also educate on still why we need groups like this.
Mark, I really like those 4 A's. So if you could pop them in the chat again, then we can all learn from them. But that was really great. Thank you. My third and final question I'd like to put to you, Ollie, in the first instance. Many people are concerned about making gestures which could be seen as tokenistic or performative as allies. So a bit nervous about what it means. How do you avoid tokenism as an ally?
That's a lot of the answer to that question is actually in what Mark was just saying there, because I think that a key part of actually becoming a good ally and ensuring that we're actually achieving change is actually defining what an ally is. And I sometimes ask people, what are you thinking about when you think of an ally? I think a lot of people have somewhere in their subconscious a picture of Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder singing "Ebony and Ivory live together in perfect harmony," and we're not actually thinking of the fact that allyship can actually be a tough journey. And just a bit like Siobhan was saying there is a price to pay for allyship. It's not the coolest or the most popular thing. And then having defined it, the next thing we do is educate ourselves, try and understand, exactly as Mark said, the case for each of these. And I've often found that just because I'm an ally of ethnicity doesn't mean I understand a lot of the cases for a lot of other parts. And I've even found supposed champions sometimes be obstacles to certain parts of the D&I agenda that they consider a threat. The other thing we do is immerse ourselves into the live the minority experience by immersing ourselves into a world that is different from ours. So the challenge I often put to people is, in your world, and I'm not talking about your professional world, but your personal world, who is different? Who have you got in your world who's different from you? Because very often it takes that level of proximity to develop the empathy that is needed. And then after doing all of that, we then need to come up with particular goals within our organizations. So after all's said and done, what's done? How much of the good talk and the woke language actually results in actual change? Change in terms of attraction into our industries, change in terms of retention, and change in terms of progression. And if we tie the allyship programs that we have within our organizations to measurable goals, then it'd be achieved. To quote somebody who said, allyship is not a badge, it's a battle scar. And I think that's a very important one to remember.
Thank you very much, Ollie. That was really rich, and all of your contributions have been incredibly pithy and incredibly rich. So really do appreciate that. I'm not sure whether, Mark, you wanted to build on that, or Alex or Siobhan?
I was just going to build on that. I was just going to say on that definition, know what the definition of performative allyship is, learn it, understand it, and then self-question whether any of your behaviors or actions, personally or organizationally, are fitting into that definition. And if so, be honest with where you are on that continuum and learning journey, and keep aspiring to get to that advocacy model.
Thank you, Mark. Alex, and then Siobhan.
Just a really quick point is that, just to know, I've been contacted by a lot of men who are asking, how can I be an ally to women in engineering? And I think that's really lovely to see. I'm happy that people are contacting me to ask that, but I think it just shows that there is a bit of a fear around, what am I supposed to do? What should I be doing? And so if we can bring this into conversation more and start showing what it means, practically means, on little day-to-day acts, what it means to be an ally to somebody, I think it will help everyone feel a bit more comfortable with what they're doing, so it doesn't just become a tokenistic action, or it doesn't just become something like a badge that you wear. It's actually embedded in your behavior. But I think at the moment, sometimes people are maybe uncomfortable or a bit reticent. They don't want to be seen to be doing something that's wrong, but they maybe have good intentions. So I think having the conversation, showing what good looks like, and making this much more common language and common discussion will be really, really positive step forward.
Thank you, Alex. And Siobhan?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back, thanks to Lorraine, to something that Mark said about how difficult it can be sometimes at times of stress in an organisation to deal with allyship. And I think particularly at the moment with COVID-19 and all the changes that are going on in the workplace, this has never been something that's more important. And I think that, as allies, we need to consider who's not in the room and why are they not in the room. And when we are making all of these changes, we might be being asked by government to stagger our start and finish times. We might be asked to, put in place one-way systems. A one-way system for somebody who's got a sight impairment may well be a massive challenge. A staggered start time can either make it easy for women or make it impossible for women. And so at times like this, carrying out equality impact assessments, talking to our staff, involving them and engaging them is critically important. And when we're making these changes, and looking at it as an organizational culture can give you so much benefits if it's an inclusive one and that you've got everyone in the room talking to you, but it can be absolutely detrimental if you haven't done that groundwork.
That is an excellent point at which to kind of draw this section of our conversation together. I mean, I think you've all done so really well at reinforcing the messages that have been coming throughout the whole of this conference, which is about, stepping up, supporting the change. It's a cultural change. It's not a short run. We're in it for the duration, and that we need to be much more active in our advocacy of diversity and inclusion, and we've all got a role to play with it, and to be less shy, I guess, about that. So I think now my task is to help you get into the breakout sessions. So, and they're going to be led by each of the facilitators. So when you go into the breakout rooms in a minute, we'd like you to turn on your cameras because they're going to be small, intimate groups. So it'll be helpful for the conversation, if you're happy, of course, to turn on your cameras. And then there'll be discussion around the points that we've just spoken about in more depth, and I guess hopefully so that you can gain some more confidence for when you go back to your sites of work and become even more active allies yourself. So I think that's my bit done, and I think you're going to be magically whisked into the breakout rooms respectively. Okay, so I think most of us have come back from our conversations. What I'd like is a little bit of feedback from my erstwhile facilitators. So if I start with Rob.
Yes, hello, thank you. So keeping this super brief, we had a great chat, thanks to my team, and apologies that someone got cut off midway as we were pulled back into this room. Poor management on my side. We really had a very interesting conversation about two-way mentoring and reverse mentoring as a way of building empathy, which for us was a really strong theme. And some people in our group had some really good experiences with that. And it was something that we felt that we wanted to explore, noting that often mentoring is around the age difference, so younger members of staff with older members of staff, but that widening that out to look at other diversity demographics could be really important and something to explore. And also we touched a little bit towards the end on the challenge of being a lone voice as an ally, and feeling like even if you were happy to just step up and always be that person, it can be quite isolating, and the importance of making sure that allies' actions are embedded in a structure and a framework that leads somewhere, so that when we're trying to recruit more allies to the cause, they know that when they step up and when they make a stand and when they support, it's connected to a bigger strategy, and it drives towards serious agenda change.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate the pithiness of your feedback, and that thing about being a lone voice is one of the challenges of being an ally. So that's where I talked earlier about us needing to be brave and bold. Ollie, what's the feedback from your workshop?
Yeah, it was a very interesting discussion. We first of all started with, we were asking the questions, what are the obstacles, what are the barriers to people becoming allies? And one of the points that was mentioned is looking at where people started. It's very easy to take for granted how much change has happened in the last few years. And part of the process is people having the courage to adapt. There was also the fact that people who are both champions and their allies need the space and the courage to actually speak about their experiences and to speak about the world, the way the world looks. And somebody else made the point that yes, allyship is a two-way street. We then went on to a very interesting discussion around within the context of remote working and flexible working, what are the problems or potential challenges? And we had different opinions. Somebody thought it was mainly a problem because it's very hard to actually get to know somebody remotely, but another point that was made is that it could also be an enabler, and we ended and somebody came up with a good definition for allyship, which I think everyone should learn, which is co-disruptor, which I thought is a really good description. So that's a summary of our discussion.
Thanks a lot, Ollie. And can I move on to Monica?
Sure. So we talked a lot about what an ally is and what it means to be an ally. So we explored the idea that an ally is somebody who has empathy, somebody who takes action, somebody who recognizes that there are challenges that some people may have, and that they were willing to support each other. We also talked about how the COVID-19 situation exacerbated inequalities, but at the same time, it gave us an opportunity to get to know each other in a different way and see each other in a more human way, maybe. So the question is, how can we make sure that we can take that forward after the COVID-19 situation ends?
Thanks very much, Monica. And can I go to you, Mark?
Sure. So we spoke a bit around the actually stepping forward and offering to help, but then the fear of the group in question pushing back and saying we don't need your help. So the point was made that you, instead of actively getting involved in mansplaining or whatever, being a catalyst and doing some stuff behind the scenes, asking for permission, asking how you can help. Generally, the point was made that people are scared of getting it wrong, and that's what can hold people back. And so it's around the framing of the conversation. We did have a couple of points on language around just the word concept allies itself can sound divisive. It sounds like we're at war, and maybe we spend more time educating on what an ally is rather than just using the word supporter. And that's why at Engineering we say LGBT plus engineers and supporters. We had then just some final little points around neurodiversity in the population being underrepresented, and then support for SEN and STEM students at school, and some talk around the benefits of reciprocal mentoring than reverse mentoring, because reverse implies it's on the individual who's underrepresented to educate upwards, whereas reciprocal implies both parties are going to learn. So some comments there in the language of what we're doing.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Mark. And Sarah, what's the feedback from your breakout room?
Okay, thank you very much. We had quite a long discussion just about D&I and all the activities that everybody was working on in their various roles. One of the things that strongly came out at the end was the fact that if we're not careful because of COVID, the emphasis on diversity and inclusion could slip, and there's a real danger in that the D&I piece will get lost. So, for example, the gender pay gap reporting has been paused because of the pandemic, and there was a sense in which you could use your allyship to try and make sure that these things continue to happen within your organisations, so that despite the fact that the government's not leading on it at the moment, the organisations should still feel the imperative to take responsibility for these key activities, and really making sure that your voice was heard within your own organisation to make sure that that D&I piece isn't lost.
Thank you, Sarah, and that's a really important point, because in terms of keeping up momentum and attention, allies have an incredibly powerful opportunity to make sure that we don't lose sight of the things that are really important. Thank you. Ursula, can I turn to you for some feedback from our group?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you very much to everyone who was in our breakout. And what we mostly spoke about is actually sort of the role and the sort of importance of training and education in terms of sort of building that sort of institution of allyship within organizations. And so what was important is sort of that sponsorship, that sort of education for managers to know how to interpret D&I policies, and sort of how to again sort of how to open such kind of sort of routes for support, and whether it's for employees that could be allies, and those that must be sort of being sort of supported. So and it's also important, I think, sort of with that, it's so that will fit into sort of knowing what works, what doesn't. So any kind of successes or sort of failures with this in this regard, sort of can be measured, and of course course that will feed into better D&I policies. Yes, I think that, you know, so we also spoke about barriers and obstacles, which I think sort of links to that. So we agreed there is, you know, often there is a lack of awareness and that understanding, hence why training education would be sort of recommended.
Thank you, Ursula. Well done. And Polly, did you facilitate one of the groups?
I did, yes.
So can I have feedback from you, please?
Thank you. Yes, so we just picked up on some of the themes that the others have talked around in terms of what is an ally and what do the day-to-day actions of an ally, what can they look like around being an active friend, kind of examining your own biases and behaviours, speaking up, and then looking to use neutral language. There was a good conversation we had around if you're unaware that if there's a minority group either within the organisation or perhaps in the meeting that you're in for kind of hidden characteristics. Can you be an ally in those circumstances? And the group had a good discussion about actually, yes, it's about being inclusive in your behaviours and your actions, and kind of taking that degree of assumption around assuming that there are minority groups in the room in all your behaviours and actions, and to speaking out whether or not that you know someone is necessarily a disabled colleague or an LGBT+ colleague, for example. So we had a good discussion around that, which was really useful.
Thank you, Polly. And hopefully I've covered every breakout room. I'm looking for some nods. Wonderful. So I think just slightly over time, it's one of our goals for this event is that every delegate can go away not only with having had their perspectives challenged, but also being able to take concrete actions to affect change in your own context. So to help with that, we encourage each of you to commit to one of the event pledges. And the link to the pledges is placed in the chat box now. So please look at them, make a commitment to action, and before you head off and go and enjoy your evening. And I think my commitment was around accountability, but I might have changed it in the course of the day.